For the past 2 years during this pandemic, I've heard a range of emotions from Anglicans, from the initial fear and anxiety to determination and courage, from discouragement and fatigue to even anger and grief. But in the last little while, as vaccines have rolled out, infection numbers drop, churches, schools, and businesses start to reopen, as a new normal starts to emerge, we're starting to hear something new: hope. Hope is bubbling up again and people are starting to dream. I want to hear about those dreams. I believe in dreams, and I believe that God speaks to us through dreams. Where is God leading us next? As we come out of this pandemic, what is next for us? On Thursday, March the 10th, we will be starting a new weekly lunch hour online gathering called Tending the Soul. It's a series of honest and hopeful conversations for the church and its leaders about ministry in this time. Every Thursday at noon, live streamed over our Facebook page, a small group will discuss with me or one of our other bishops what's changed in our church and what are we learning. Where are we finding abundance in the face of disruption? What do we imagine for the future? Each hour-long session will include a conversation between church leaders, both lay and ordained, on a particular topic, with plenty of time for questions and discussion. Together, we'll hear some of the stories and best ideas from across the diocese. We'll share what's tough in ministry these days and also how we see the future unfolding. We'll talk about some of the common questions, opportunities, and challenges facing our church. And we will support each other because honestly, we're all in this together. None of us is alone. We want to create a space for conversation that is both honest and hopeful. So please join us every Thursday at noon starting on March the 10th on the Diocesan Facebook page. For the full list of dates and topics, check out our events calendar listing on our website, toronto.anglican.ca. I look forward to seeing you online for these Tending the Soul conversations as we share our dreams, seed our imaginations, and discern together what God is calling us to do, to be, and to become as Christ's church in the Diocese of Toronto.
Hello and welcome to Tending the Soul this afternoon. I'm Janet Marshall, the Director of Congregational Development for the Diocese of Toronto. As we begin to see our way into gathering together again, I know I'm hearing many questions from congregations about how we can reconnect and regather with children and young families. It's been really tough on families, the pandemic, managing lockdown work and learning, living their lives on Zoom and being isolated from friends and family. And there are many questions about how we respond now, what comes next as we reimagine ministry with children and their parents. And we're here today with some people who have some real experience and imagination about all of this. And so we're here with Bridgette Brain, who's worked with children and youth across the diocese for a decade. Graduate of Wycliffe College, she excelled in their children's, youth, and family ministry courses. And she is now eagerly anticipating joining a vibrant and growing worshiping community as children's ministry director in June. And we're here with Laura Walton, who is the Diocesan Volunteer Coordinator of the Children's Network and is a parishioner at Holy Trinity Clearview. And Laura's worked in children's and family ministry for many years as well, so brings incredible experience to the table. And of course, Bishop Kevin Robertson, who is here to also share his thoughts from the field and his long ministry with congregations. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Bishop Kevin to perhaps pray and get us started on the conversation.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you for the warm welcome. And it's wonderful to be here with you and Bridgette and Laura and all of you who are joining us online today. I've really enjoyed these Tending the Soul series and really looking forward to the conversation we have today. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for the gift of this day and the gift of this time together. As we turn our minds and hearts to the ministry of children in the life of your church, we ask you to guide and bless our conversation. Remind us, O God, of the special place of children in the life of the kingdom of God, as taught by your Son, Jesus. Open our eyes and ears, our minds and hearts and voices, that we may show forth that love for all your people and the special place of children in the church. As we come out of this time of pandemic, inspire us, encourage us, give us creative minds to meet the needs of families in particular as they come back into the life of your gathered community. All these things we ask in this Easter season through Jesus Christ, who is our risen Lord and Savior. Amen. Well, I'm delighted to be the bishop that gets to listen in on this conversation today and contribute whatever I may have to contribute. I'd just like to maybe set the clip, as Bishop Asbill likes to say, by reflecting maybe not so much initially on my latter experience as a parent, although I have lots to say about that, or even as a bishop over the past 5 years, watching and experiencing parishes navigate children's ministry, especially through the pandemic. But rather, I'd like to begin by going back to my own childhood, because I was very much discipled as a child. I was baptized when I was 4 weeks old in the font of our local parish church in Fort Erie, down in the Diocese of Niagara. And my memories of church as a child and as going to church as a family, wow, lots of different experiences, and often led by the kinds of people that we see on the screen today, Laura and Bridgette and others whose gifts in ministry have been especially attuned to foster and nurture and cultivate the ministry for children and with children. In my own childhood, I went to Sunday school, as many people have and continue to do. I was in our Servers Guild eventually when I was old enough to join. I went to First Communion classes and then confirmation classes as a child in our home parish. I sang in our junior choir, which is a very different kind of children's education. Nevertheless, the words of Scripture and the hymnody of the church being imbued in children in a very particular way. So I had all of these various experiences as a child in learning from other people and in different ways. And I can honestly say that I'm not sure that I would be a Christian today. I certainly wouldn't be a priest and now a bishop. Had various role models and teachers in my own life, in my family life, my parents and grandparents and godparents, but the people in my home parish community, if they had not taken the time and given their gifts for the nurturing of a faith in me and in others like me in my parish, I wouldn't claim this faith that I claim today. And so in that way, the ministry of those in children and family ministry in my own life even surpasses the ministry of clergy and other role models. And I take this opportunity today to give deep thanks for those people. Some of them, I remember their names. Others, I don't. But I know that they were tremendously formative in my life. And looking back as a 50-year-old man, I'm hugely indebted to them. So much looking forward to the conversation today, and looking forward to hearing Bridgette and Laura and the many comments I know that will come in through our live chat today as well. So thank you. Well, back to you, Janet.
Yes. Thank you, Bishop. And of course, we are looking forward to the comments and questions that you might have if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube at this point. And we'll try and get to address as many of them as we have time for today. So I'm going to pass this over to Bridgette now. Bridgette, telling us about your experience in the pandemic, what ministries looked like, and the values for how we're serving different, especially around building community. So Bridgette, it's over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Janet. Yeah, so over the course of the pandemic, I had the privilege of being at 2 different parishes in the city and doing children's ministry in both of them and seeing sort of what the commonalities were and how they did ministry and what it looked like and how it differed from before. So going into the pandemic, it was a very different scope than we had known before the pandemic. Everyone was suddenly online with nothing else to do. And then in-person children's ministry was banned. And then it was one of the last things to be re-permitted for their safety. And there was no food and no drink allowed, which is very hard for children's ministry. And then we had to follow, all the social distance and other protocols once we were allowed to come back in person. And then there were new means of communication as well as new expectations of communication. So many emails, and and we were asking really big questions. What does it mean or look like to care for the family in this time? The other big questions that we asked were, how do we serve families where they are at? What do they need from us as the church? And where do they need to see and experience the saving and redemptive life of Christ? What do they need spiritually? And these questions can and need to be asked, not just during the pandemic, but at all times. And then another big question we asked ourselves as the whole church and our personal lives too, how can we still be together while apart and be safe? And so through asking these questions, we learned that families were burnt out and trying desperately to stay afloat. They were burnt out from Zoom, burnt out from essentially homeschooling their kids while working from home because of online learning, and then other stresses that the pandemic brought, which we all shared, concern for the future. And kids felt the weight of the pandemic more than any of us, especially around fear for it, as well as shame of even getting sick. And also, we saw in many ways that children could adapt better than we could to these new and strange times. And we learned that families really needed to be equipped with how to teach and live the faith at home as a family. So I would love to share with you some of the effective strategies of ministry that I've seen and experienced throughout the pandemic. We asked ourselves, how do we care for and serve families during this time? What do they need and how can we help? So for our in-person ministry strategies, we did seasonal pastoral calls. So every couple of months or so, we would call and check in with every family that was connected to our church and check in and ask how they were doing, how we could help, and what we could pray for. And they really appreciated these phone calls to that connection, that community, that we still cared for them as the church. We sent out surveys, checking in and exploring new creative ministry ideas to see what would resonate with our community, what they would respond to, and what they would say, actually, no, we don't need this during this time. And so those were really effective. We checked in with our volunteers regularly, adjusting their roles according to their new capacities as things changed throughout the pandemic. And then we visited families on their doorsteps and lawns, and we visited outside. We brought them gift bags with spiritual activities and reflections that families could do together during the time. And then we got together outside when we could, doing neighborhood walks and park walks. Some of the digital ministry strategies that we did was we kept families up to date through weekly emails as things were constantly changing and evolving. We wanted to make sure everybody knew what to expect. And we kept our website up to date with events and changes. And we even included resources for families like Christian family podcasts or catechesis podcasts or children and family theology books, just anything to help families live the faith at home and equip them with what they would need to do that. We would include YouTube links to wonderful worship videos that kids loved to sing and dance along to. We also did Zoom Sunday school. which was really cool and really neat. We actually had students from kids from other countries join us who wouldn't otherwise be able to join us. So that was really neat and interesting. We also did a virtual Christmas pageant, which was new for everyone, which worked out really well. So yeah, those are some of the digital ministry strategies that we did. And then we did some hybrid ministry strategies. So some that involved online components as well as in-person components. So one of them being the online family worship, which we would do before the live stream service. We would gather on Zoom as like families would log in together, and then we would just go through our own mini half-hour service together before the church live stream service was live streamed. And we would do that for special seasons as well. So one thing that we did was create these Advent wreath kits to give families so they could use them at home throughout Advent to light each candle. And then we would gather on Zoom every week to light the candles of the Advent wreath. And yeah, just with a short, again, half-hour mini worship service, which was really beautiful. And then for Lent, we did something very different, which was we still did the pancake thing, but through Zoom. And so we did pancake designs. So the kids would request like, oh, can you make a parrot? Or, oh, can you make this? And so we would do that as we were talking about faith discussions, as well as, you know, what the meaning of Lent was. And so we had this really fun thing, as well as like these deep, meaningful conversations at the same time, which was really all while making pancakes, you know, it was good. It was really wonderful. At another parish, we did an end of year celebration service watch party. So this is something that sort of evolved according to the specific pandemic restrictions that were constantly changing. It was going to be just a virtual service, but then we could gather in person again. So we did a ticketed event where families could come and we could watch the service together in the service space, which was really neat and really wonderful and definitely needed at that time. And then when we could have children's ministry in person again, we offered both in-person and online ministry on Sunday mornings. So sometimes that looked like we would have an in-person children's ministry and then a laptop beside us with the Zoom video with the other kids online zoomed in or projected onto the screen so we could all still be together in some way. So that being said, this leads me into sort of my half-effective ministry strategy, which is sort of meeting online only. So even though meeting online gave us community and connection we wouldn't have had otherwise, and it allowed us to connect from all over the world, it ultimately was not the be-all, end-all. Online could and can meet a specific need, but it is not as good as being together in person. It could save on like commute time or, you know, not having to wake up as early on Sunday mornings or what have you. But Zoom fatigue was a real thing, and kids really experienced that a lot, having to do online classes and then online children's ministry and then online XYZ, right? Like it got a lot. So yeah, definitely online meeting has its time and its place and its goodness, but it's not the be all end all. So that's why I sort of categorize it as half effective. And then I just wanted to share sort of a verse that was on my heart as I was creating this talk, and sort of the thing that like God was speaking to me was Isaiah 43:19. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. And I feel like that's really true. Like God was definitely making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland throughout the pandemic, especially for children's ministry, because we got to do ministry in new ways, in ways that we wouldn't have had the courage or capacity to explore beforehand. We were no longer being held back by the old ways and traditions of this is how we've always done things, and therefore it's worked in the past and we have to continue doing it or nothing else will ever work, right? We got to experiment and we got to see where God was leading us, where the Holy Spirit was leading us. It was the chance to expand and to step out in faith and to go where God was calling. And we got to try new things and actually be okay with failing. It showed that we could actually be flexible and that we could pivot. So those are all the things that I've learned throughout the pandemic in children's ministry, and I'm glad that I could share them with you today. Back to you, Janet.
Oh, thanks so much, Bridgette. I was really taken by that image of perceiving new things, seeing new things, and how much of what you were seeing was changing as it was going along. You know, the image of all of the different feelings and emotions coming up from kids and families, and you know, some that you would have imagined, but others, you know, it made a whole lot of sense to me when you said that piece about, you know, kids feeling guilty about getting sick. I know that from one of my grandchildren who felt so deeply guilty about getting sick, she went and vaccinated herself with a pencil. So you know, these you never expect it. But and the other thing I thought that was really fascinating was that you picking up on was the ever-changing capacity of our volunteers, that we couldn't imagine. It was like, oh yeah, these are our volunteers, you know, we can count on them in the same way all the way through, but they were, you know, their capacity was changing all the time as well. So thank you for those. I'm sure there will be some interesting questions and comments coming along. And I'm going to pass it over to Laura now. Laura, you've had a really interesting role in the pandemic, watching the situation of a number of churches around the diocese, being the person who's there to kind of calm people, you know, speak to their fears and encourage them at the same time. So Laura, it's over to you.
Thanks, Janet. As Janet pointed out, I've worked for 8 years in a larger parish as their youth and young family worker. And I've also done this in a rural multi-point, along with volunteering with the Diocese as their children's ministry volunteer for over a decade. I've seen a dramatic shift in that time. In 2022, there is little that is the same as when I started over 15 years ago, let alone when I was a young Anglican, which was a long time ago. I've heard from so many parishes in the last few months looking for hope as they reopen. There is hope, and there's a lot of opportunity as well. If you've been following along through the last few months of Tending the Soul, you may have seen the same theme weaving through it all that I have. That is community. Whether you're looking to rebuild parish programs after the pandemic, reach out to those who are not in church or aren't returning to church, to children, youth, and families, or just working to improve technology, each group and topic are grounded in building community. The adage, it takes a village, continues to be where the focus lies for our parishes, no matter where the pandemic has taken us. The village mentality is not simply for Sundays anymore, but in creating valid interconnectedness, not only in standard ways, but as Bridgette said, with new dynamics. Children and young family ministry are topics where there is no cookie cutter program or suggestions that fit all circumstances. There are so many variables that play into what works for each parish. We tend to want a quick fix that will bring in young families immediately. Now we throw a 2-year pandemic into the mix, and for many parishes, it feels like they are again starting from square one. When it comes to children's ministry, we have to understand the church on Sunday is not the same it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 2 years ago. We went from church on Sunday for many as a must, but that's not the case anymore. Parents, guardians are bound by jobs that are not Monday to Friday, nor 9 to 5. Some are working at home, some are not working at home. There are single parent families, grandparent-led families, blended families, just to name a few. And never mind the extracurricular activities that go on 7 days a week now. With this shift, it changes Sunday morning programming dynamics. While Sundays are important, weekday events are becoming more valuable as well. The focus has to shift from our older style education programs into parts where we offer child and family connectedness and support. We offer Christian education, but also support for the ever-changing lives that affect both the children and their families. Programs such as Messy Church, Vacation Bible Camps, homework clubs, they all offer a link between church and the community and offer a comfort level that there is a village to support families and their children. An example is a program I ran on Saturday evenings, both in the larger parish I worked at and the rural multi-point. It was a program for the community based on families and focused on them with children aged 3 to 10 years old. It included parents, children, caregivers, grandparents, whoever wanted to come along. It was a time for a family meal, kids' crafts, interactive Bible stories, music, and an informal place to meet the community. A casual setting to get to know the parish. Parents could relax, no meals to cook, no childcare to worry about, and a time to meet with others who had children the same age. And there was no financial ask. Those families began to look at baptism, pageant participation, VBC as well. Familiarity offers comfort, and while many only came for that program, we became their church. And as Bridgette pointed out, while the pandemic changed our ability to offer programs, it was important to stay in touch with children and families throughout. Many have yet to come back. For our own parish, we dropped off craft bags, checked in with adults, made sure the kids knew we missed them. And some parishes that I heard about and that Bridgette talked about did online programs as well where possible. But again, a full day of school with Zoom and parents working from home, online became really difficult for some places. So really, we've moved into a hybrid reality. Families will come back, some won't. And your parish now needs to assess this and look to your community for answers. And when I say community, I don't just mean the church community. It's the people that are surrounding you. What do they need? How are you going to make a connection? We need to move away from putting bums in the pews to looking outward and offering the gospel through our works. And while that doesn't mean a family will join us regularly in our parishes sometimes, we can still be their go-to place for support. So when you're looking to do children's ministry programs, look to the community's needs, both internally and externally. How can your parish be of service? Where are the community struggles, the interests? Assess people in your village, and what do you have the capacity to do and to take on? What are your gifts? Can you do programs in conjunction with other churches in your area? There's hope and opportunities abound, but it will take some assessment to see how you can be God's heart and hands in the area. Thinking outside the box and meeting people where they are rather than where we want them to be is going to be important, especially with children and young family ministry. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Laura. It was interesting, the idea of reaching out and doing programming or doing things together with other churches in your area. Or, I mean, so much of what I'm seeing right now is an opening to a more regional idea of how it is that we can do ministry, of coming together, and that the strength of that sense of village, rather than, you know, everybody on their own, but we're going to make a different kind of community here.
It's a different village, though. I mean, you know, in the 40s and 50s, my grandparents were at St. Margaret's, New Toronto, and everybody walked to church as a family. And then you had a meal and Sunday dinners. And that's just not the same village anymore.
Yeah.
And especially for the rural parishes who are driving and things like that. It was always a village, but it's just a different village.
Interesting. Yeah.
I was really struck.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I was struck by, for both of you, Bridgette and Laura, first of all, thank you. Wow. Both of you in your own contexts, immersed in such amazing and creative ministry. And that was kind of my observation, is just I think we thought as a church that we were quite creative and innovative before the pandemic. And I think in some ways we were. I mean, to be fair, I think we realized some years ago that that the same old was just not going to cut it in lots of different ways. But this pandemic has put us into a place where innovation and creativity, I think, have really just gone right off the graph. And I think that's even more so in children and family ministry. I loved, Bridgette, when you were talking about just the development of all these things. And it felt like you were just kind of and you too, Laura, throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. And Bridgette, I loved what you had to say about you got to try new things and you realized that you were okay failing. Wow. If the church more broadly than children and family ministry could embrace trying new things without the fear of failure,
Yeah.
we would be, oh my goodness, we would be in such a different place. And I think we're going there. I think it's one of the great blessings of the pandemic is we have been freed out of necessity to try some new things. I think what I wanted to ask both of you about is what the feedback loop was like. You now realize after 2 years that some things worked and some didn't, and you are both professionals in this field. But what was it like, and how did you draw back some feedback from children, from families, about what was working for them and what wasn't? And the things that have worked over the pandemic, can you see pulling some of those things through into a post-pandemic time based on the feedback that you've been given?
For me, the parish I'm in is very small, so we don't have a whackload of kids that are, and we're rural too, so there's nobody walking to church. The big thing has been keeping in touch with the kids, and I don't know if Bridgette found this, but the kids aren't back yet for us. We've stayed in touch with them. Their parents want to come back. They've told us, but it really has been keeping the relationship alive. And this is for a small one. I can't speak so much for the bigger parishes, but it's been making sure that they appreciated that we kept that connection over the 2 years, because it was hard on parents. I mean, and my kids are older, but it was not an easy go of it. And Bishop Kevin, you would know that with your two younger ones. I mean, lockdown is not a simple thing to do. And Bridgette, I don't know if
it's
you found
not. And when you have, you both alluded to this in your comments about when in the most difficult days of the pandemic, when our kids were doing remote learning, just the thought of doing anything else on Zoom or on a screen after being in class from 9 till 3:30 in a little room, it was daunting, and it felt wrong to ask our kids to do anything else, even the really important stuff like this of engaging in a church community. It was hard to do that. So I, for one, am happy to see the end of that, and to be more discerning about how we use screens, because we just used them for everything a year ago, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say that, I've just been reflecting on the question, how do you create those feedback loops, and how do you reach out to families? And so we did, or at least my philosophy was, you can't over communicate. And so my goal was to make sure all families knew as regularly as possible what we were up to, through emails, through updating our website, through phone calls, through, when we could, meeting in person, like on Sunday, or even throughout the week, just making sure that they were kept up to date with what we were thinking, what was going on, and then being genuinely open to their feedback, being receptive to it. Like, hey, I really want to know where you're at, what you need from us. What if we did this? Would that work for you? Oh, if not, okay, would this work? And just having that conversation and sharing in that ministry with them, because it's not just ours. We are the church discipling these kids together with the parents. And so it's important to keep them in the loop on how we plan to do that, especially during these times. So I would say, in a big way that we did that too was also through surveys, just sending it out, anonymous, give us your honest feedback, let us know what's really going on. And in that way, they didn't necessarily have to be shy or like, oh, I don't really want to say this, I'm afraid I'll hurt their feelings. It's like, okay, it's anonymous, here we go. So it was helpful that way. And we could see where families were at, what they needed, what they wanted. And I think it depended on where in the pandemic that we were, on how comfortable people felt coming back. So, there were always sort of like, the families with the newborns were really hesitant to come in and expose their children who were have brand new immune systems, you know, like, do we really want to do that, right? So they were a little more shy at times. Whereas others were like, yes, please, I have small children, online only is driving me crazy. Bring them back. Let's go.
Yeah.
So really it depended on sort of what stage the family was at, as well as, you know, what the church was doing. And yeah.
It's interesting because for a very long time, I think that there was a dialogue around ministry with children and families that went between sort of the gathered experience at church, the church programming, the Sunday school, the messy church, that sort of thing, but also trying to imagine how we resource church at home.
That's right.
And so the pieces of small pieces of worship or prayer or whatever, or the Advent wreaths, you know, that we could send home and resource. And now it seems to me that we've got a threefold program in now that we need to pay attention to, because we've added now the digital experience to all of that. And so it opens out both the possibilities for children's ministry, but also maybe something about the skills and the training that we might need to consider for people wanting, or even the volunteer base, you know, for children's ministry now.
And that's always a problem I find too, is the volunteer base. That's always an issue with children's ministry. Especially for parishes that can't have a paid person in it, or don't have somebody that's their passion. And I don't have an answer to that, but I think a lot of the time, you know, I always tell the story that I remember bringing my kids one time, and when they were small, and it was a new parish, and I walked in, and the first thing they said to me, "Would you like to take them downstairs to the nursery?" And I thought, no, not really. And then the next thing is, "Do you want to sign up for a week on the Sunday school roster?" And I was like, no, not really. I see my kids all week, and you know, I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I think that's the thing is getting our minds wrapped around how to engage with people that aren't the parents to support the ministry, and that's tough. And online, I wonder, and it's just kind of a reflection, is will we have better luck with that? Because people, it's different than being in a room on a Sunday morning with a whole bunch of younger kids. And people have different gifts. So, I mean, I wonder if there's a different way to utilize those gifts online.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah.
I say that no matter how volunteers are serving, as long as they feel supported, as well as what they're doing is valuable, you know, they're happy to do it. And I find that often people are hesitant or afraid of children's ministry because they think, oh, it's chaos. I don't want to deal with chaos. And so I think it's important to reassure them and say, actually, it doesn't have to be chaos. And this is how we're making sure it's not. Right. Yeah. And it's actually, you know, very low, like come in, just be present, you know, and give them tangible things to do that are, you know, just a foot in the door. Like you don't, it's not, here's the whole ministry, goodbye. It's like,
see you later.
what's one small thing I can give you to do? And that would actually be a great help to us. And as well as, you know, teaching the ethos or the theology of why we teach kids the faith, right? Like that's what it ultimately comes down to. We want to see these kids grow up in the faith, and we want to see them come to know Jesus. And that is such a valuable thing to get to do, is to walk alongside children in their faith journey.
I'm really glad today that this is, the focus is not only on children's ministry, but family ministry, because I think that is such a key to this. And I'm really mindful of that based on what we've just been saying about volunteers and lay leaders in the church. I remember being at a conference at Christ Church Oshawa about 15 years ago when Judy Paulson was there. And I remember so clearly, it was about messy church, I think, but I remember Judy saying that in her view, the primary responsibility for the discipleship of children is at the home by parents, guardians, grandparents, and that the secondary leadership of that is in the parish by staff and or volunteers. And how much more true that must be in the pandemic. The challenge, I think, is that I think many parents and grandparents and guardians don't feel equipped. They don't have the confidence. I think what you both said about when you walk in, you don't necessarily want to ship your kids off to Sunday school, nor do you necessarily want them at church with you. But we want them as parents to be formed in the faith. And I find that a lot of adults don't have that confidence. It's not that they don't care about it. I think they do, but they don't know how to go about doing it. And I wonder if the two of you, Bridgette and Laura, might just comment on whether you think the pandemic has shifted that, how we equip parents and grandparents to do that work at home out of necessity over the past 2 years, but where that might go in the future around the balance of professional education through people like the two of you and your colleagues, and the more informal, home-based discipleship that takes place around the dinner table.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think there wasn't a lot to begin with before the pandemic online. I mean, there was stuff, but it wasn't, if you Googled it, it was kind of, there's a bit. That's gotten better as a lot of churches, bigger churches, have been able to shift quickly and create some programming. So I think that will help. But I think it's something very valid, Kevin, because the thing is, the dinner table doesn't exist for a lot of families anymore either. They're
Right.
flying around and I think they're doing this, that, and the other thing. So it's almost like you need a new program to, not that there's not some out there, but I think there needs to be new programs to do that, for bedtime stories, for talking before bed, or finding different moments in the day to have that at home. But I think it's a good thing to be aware of. I do. And I think it's something we need to look at as more and more come out. Because my guess is that's what will happen over the next year or so is people will start to look at this kind of hybrid where, here are lessons and the way to be at church. And here's how we carry that into the home more.
Absolutely. I think, prior to the pandemic, we were having these conversations of, it used to be, I bring my kid to church, I send them down to Sunday school, they get their Christian education, we go home, right? Like that's kind of how it used to be.
Have your juicy cookies.
That's right. And then, chaos. Anyways, yeah. And then we had these conversations of, okay, what does it look like to equip parents to teach the faith at home? Because you're absolutely right. Like I think some parents would definitely feel like, oh, how do I do that with my children? Like, I know what my faith looks like, but what does the faith of my child look like? And how could I invite, or they might even feel like scared or intimidation to speak about the faith with their child because it could be like indoctrination or something, that's what our society sort of talks about that way too. But really, it's about, believing that your child does have a spirituality. Is a spiritual being as much as anybody else. And then, doing it as authentically as you can. It doesn't necessarily have to be around the dinner table. It could be in how you choose to parent, when your two kids are in a fight, what do you tell them, right? How do you expect them to react or think, or, what could you invite them into that way? It could be, prayers before bedtime or, routines throughout the day. Maybe after dinner or after bath time or whatever, you gather around and you light a candle and say a prayer together, or, every Saturday at lunch, you read the Bible together, or, just small ways that you can incorporate it. Maybe you write scripture on like a chalkboard in your home, or that your kids could read, or maybe you draw a Bible story together after you read it. Like, there are so many different ways that you could live out the faith at home. Anything from like intentional choices that you make of like, this is our set worship time as a family, to just how you live and be as a Christian family, in a Christian home, like what our values are, what our family mission is, all of these things to think about.
I appreciated something that was said earlier around, when checking in with parents about how things were going, actually asking, are there things we can pray for or pray with each other? I mean, it's modeling that step out into how easily, we can attach the things that are going on in our lives with prayer, and modeling that is a great idea. We do have a question and comment around hearkening back to the comments about the sort of feelings of guilt and shame that children sometimes bear around the pandemic, and perhaps even broadening that a bit to, the church's role in being present for families and for kids who have all of these big, huge, and very different feelings and fears and thoughts around the pandemic now. And how have you found yourself in places where you're engaging this, or you're inviting it, or
Not particularly for me, just because of my setting. But I, just tying into that, and Bridgette will probably have a lot more to say on it, but I really like all these ideas, just because for us as a diocese, we don't have a lot current to offer in regards to these kind of resources. So for me, it's a huge help to hear all this, just because I can go, oh yeah, we don't have that. I don't know where the link is for that. I mean, it's really helpful to see what people are looking for. So this is as much a learning experience for me at this point as everybody else. But because I think that's a really good question that I don't have an answer for. Maybe Bridgette's a little more.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you that the tangible thing that I did, which was when I heard or sensed that there was that guilt or shame or fear around it, it was like, no, you're allowed to be sick. Just naming it, like, you're allowed to be sick. You're allowed to get COVID. You're allowed. It's okay. You're still loved. Everything is fine. And just naming it. And that's really helpful, because if you don't name it, then it just sort of like festers, and it's like, oh, what do you do with that? But just name the thing. Like, you're allowed to be sick, and that's okay. And it's not your fault. It's no one's fault. It's just going around. Like, that's really what it is, what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Well,
and we have that, I mean, in our own families as well, with our kids and grandkids, the conversations about the virus and the pandemic, and being safe with people, and and still wanting to be kind of open and in relationship, and all the values that we bring because we're people of faith, wanting to draw near to people and be with them in times of such insecurity. Yeah. Now we have a question about whether you're finding you've been able to connect with other families or new families in your community through some of these processes, through the online ministries with children, or are you hearing, or are you seeing or experiencing connecting further afield?
In my own instance, not as much, but I have heard that there are places that really went out of their way to connect with kids, and their children's groups, and by dropping packages off, like Bridgette was saying, a bag that's okay at 4:00 on Saturday, we're all going to do crafts together. You get to do it in your house, we're doing it here, and reaching out to the community in that way, because some people, church isn't their thing, and they don't want to be they're not comfortable in the building yet, if ever. So it's a way to connect. And when I said, you become their church, I mean, like, their church. When they say, someone says, there's a funeral, there's a baptism, they'll go, oh, well, I know I go to this church, or I've been, even though they may have never been in the doors. I think it's that connection again and building a relationship. So I have heard that it's actually because we're doing it in new ways, there's new ways to connect with people that maybe never would have come in the building.
Yeah, I'm certainly hearing that and seeing that there's an openness for people to connect with the church in new and different ways. I mean, I think the part of the vulnerability of the situation that we're in right now, people are reaching out.
Yeah.
I find in my experience or observation, just in general of the church, not necessarily for a children's ministry, but people like to check out a church online before they come, because then they feel a little more like they know what to expect. Because especially in like a culture that's largely unchurched or dechurched or what have you, or even Christians coming from another denomination or people who are curious about the faith, you know, what does it look like to come into church? Well, I'm afraid to do that. But if I can just observe online, and then I'm like, oh, I know what to expect. I feel confident going now. I find that that's a thing.
I think that's kind of, it's just the new way of doing programs, like I was saying, with when we did our messy church. It's that comfort level. You're not in church on Sunday. So it creates that bridge that eventually you hope will, you know, make that connection with them. So I think we've now gone to a whole new level with being online.
And families
really,
looking for.
I was going to say, it really has kind of turned things upside down around, and I've had a few interactions in the last few months since we reopened churches in the Diocese of Toronto in February, to be in places more recently where it's clear when I'm meeting people that they met the community first online and then stepped into the building some months later, which seems so, I mean, now it just seems natural, but for us to have conceived of that 2 years ago, I think kind of would have blown my mind that people met the clergy, they met other people in the community, they even saw into the church, but all through the screen of their laptop, and then secondarily stepped in person in kind of an incarnational way into the building. So I think that's going to shift things for family and youth ministry. I think it's going to shift things around the way we welcome people going forward, the way we create community, the way we sustain community.
That's right. Well, and it's an interesting conversation with the comment that we have here from Peter Mishasek about the experience of kids in youth ministry reluctant to tackle difficult questions because they want to avoid being too churchy. Well, when people meet us online, we are who we are. We're churchy, and so I think that some of our reluctance or our squeamishness about being too churchy is maybe not as is misplaced at this point, because there is something about being people of faith who are offering a different view, a different perspective, a different way of being in community and loving each other and the world that we shouldn't be hiding.
I think there's ways to discuss it too, though. I mean, you can tackle the tough things. Youth group I worked at, I had a one called Girls Night Out. It was only for teen girls, no guys, no. It was really so they could talk about the tough stuff in high school and the struggles they're having and the bullying and the, whatever issues were going on without judgment. And they had their peers to talk to as well. So I think finding space to have the tough conversations can still be faith-based. I think you just have to have the right facilitator in place who can have those tough conversations and in a healthy way. I mean, I think you can still do it from your Christian perspective, your Anglican perspective.
I think I'm wondering if it is, love that idea, Laura. Certainly, I'm having a little bit of kind of freezing on my screen, so I will just plow through here and hope that it's not on anybody else's. But at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to you, Bishop, to Kevin, and I wonder if you have any sort of comments or thoughts just to wrap us up before we talk about our next session and say farewell.
Well, thank you. I have enjoyed all of the Tending the Soul sessions that I've been able to be a part of, and that's most of them. But I'm particularly focused today on how important it is to tend the souls of our children. I think for those of us who have been on the Christian journey as adults and have been, discipled as children or came later to the faith, we now there's a stability about that. I'm not saying that we all have a perfect faith. I certainly don't. But we've had the consistency of being able to go to church in a fairly normal way and to be experiencing Christian community, to participate in the sacramental life of the church, to hear people preach. All of that has formed us in a particular way. And I think over the past 2 years, what's happened is we've had this break. And if we hadn't had people step in with courage and creativity to be a bridge, we might have lost a whole generation of people who seek to follow Jesus. And I know that sounds dramatic, but I think it's true that without people stepping in to say, we've got to make this work, we've got to find ways of, well, doing all the things that you, Bridgette, and Laura have talked about, the experimentation, trying things once or twice and either continuing on with them or stopping them, testing the waters, throwing things against the wall, getting feedback from families. If we hadn't had that, we would now be in a situation 26 months later where a lot of our young people and their families would have just had silence and just had absence from the church. And I think that would have been to their detriment and to ours as a church community. So in tending the souls of our people all through the generations, I think that the tending of the soul of our children during this pandemic has been really crucial. And I'm so grateful to God and to those of you who are in this ministry, who have been gifted in this and who have taken those gifts and used them for the building up of the church and especially of the young people in our church. So thank you. Thank you for the work that you've done and the ideas that you've shared with us today and the experiences you've shared. But far more profoundly than that, thank you for dedicating yourselves and your ministry to this really important work. We are indebted to you.
Yeah, so thank you all so much for the time that you've gifted to this conversation today. And to those of you who've been watching along on YouTube and Facebook, it's been great to have this conversation, so timely. Next week, Tending the Soul will be back again Thursday at noon. And the topic will be the transformative impact of giving. So looking at gifts of encouragement and legacy giving. And you'll be here with Bishop Andrew Asbel and Peter Mishasek, the Director of Stewardship for the Diocese for that. So look forward to next week and have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Enjoy the beautiful weather. Bye-bye for now.
Bye, everybody. Great to be with you.
Bye-bye.